Hey guys, it's Cosmic Skeptic, and today I wanted to do something a little bit different. A lot of you have asked me about the books that constantly appear in my videos behind me, and I've done a few videos in the past giving you book recommendations, but that's not quite the same thing as just showing you what's on my bookshelf, and I know that that's something that some people are interested in for some reason, so I thought I'd take a moment to just show you around and show you the kind of stuff that's on my shelves. So yeah, let's go take a look. This shelf here is probably the most special shelf in the entire collection because most of the books up here are signed or kind of otherwise special kinds of books. Except for this one on the end, I've just stuck Hitchens in there just to kind of block off the entire shelf. But we start over here with some copies of God is Not Great. For instance, this one here, which I believe is a first edition and is signed by the man himself. Someone's written lighthouses are more helpful than churches, that Ben Franklin quote, which Hitchens then signed. So I'd love to know the story behind that, but I couldn't find any information. So if this was you, reach out and let me know. We've next got a few books by Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life and Beyond Order, both of which are signed. I actually went to see, I got this book signed when I went to see Jordan Peterson at the O2 Arena in London when he was in conversation with Sam Harris and Douglas Murray, and got it signed afterwards. So those are quite special too, as well as this book by Douglas Murray, The Madness of Crowds. And this is the first book on this shelf which is special, not just because it's signed, but because it was signed when Douglas Murray came on the podcast. Anytime I have a guest in person and they have a book, I like to get them to sign a copy of the book as a kind of keepsake of the podcast. So he wrote for Alex and some message that I can't even read with his handwriting, and then signed it and put the date that we did the podcast. So that's quite a nice one too. Then we've got a few more books by Douglas Murray, followed by a bunch of Richard Dawkins books. And one of the first books I ever got signed was The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. That was the first time I ever saw Richard Dawkins, and it was an event in Oxford. And I'm pretty sure that there's a live stream that exists somewhere on some Facebook page where you can see a kind of nervous 17-year-old Alex asking Richard Dawkins a question with his squeaky voice, and it's the most embarrassing thing on the internet. So I hope that no one ever finds it. I've also got these two copies of The God Delusion, one of which is a first print American edition, one of which is a first print British edition, both of which are signed, as well as this really special thing that I came across in the United States, because this is a first edition of The Selfish Gene with the original artwork, and I found it in some kind of secondhand bookshop in the United States, and I really love this artwork. And one of the coolest things is that this fairly famous piece of art on the front of the book, I actually got to see the original piece of artwork in Richard Dawkins' house. When we went to interview him, he had, to my surprise, this artwork, the original thing itself, up on the wall, and that was a really special moment. So I love this book as well. This is quite a fun one as well. You might remember, you might have seen on my channel that I did a debate with Frank Turek on Justin Brierley's show a few years ago. I think it's got over 1 million views now, which is great. And after we had that conversation, Frank Turek gave me a copy of his book, Stealing from God, which he wrote quite a kind message inside. He said, "Dear Alex, I hope you find this encouraging," whatever that means. You have, well, he said some nice words, and then said, "Blessings, Frank Turek," and put his email so that we could keep up correspondence, which I thought was a really nice touch. I had a great time debating Frank Turek. He was a really nice guy, and I think that conversation was a great one. Next up, we've got some by Sam Harris here. So his book on free will, which many of you will know was an incredibly important part of me coming to believe that human beings don't have free will. So this is a great book, and I was happy to get a signed copy as well as Letter to a Christian Nation. That's another book that I got Sam Harris to sign at that event when I saw him. I've also got a copy of The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie, which is also signed at an event that Salman did in Oxford. Lawrence Krauss here, A Universe from Nothing. This again was signed when I interviewed Lawrence Krauss. And Lawrence Krauss was one of the earliest kind of famous people that I ever had as a guest on my channel. I remember I drove all the way up to Wales in order to interview him. It was like a 5-hour round trip for a 10-minute conversation, but at the time it was a really big deal for the channel, so this is quite a special book to me as well. Secularism by Andrew Copson, again signed, but again because he came on the podcast. Also Justin Brierley's book, Unbelievable, Why After 10 Years of Talking with Atheists, I'm Still a Christian. This was given to me by Justin Brierley. I think after Frank Turek gave me a copy of his book, Justin was like, "Wait, let me give you one of mine too." And then finally, perhaps the most prized possession of all of my book collection is Animal Liberation by Peter Singer, which of course I had Peter Singer on the podcast as well, and he signed the book and said, "To Alex, thanks for a challenging interview. Peter Singer," and then put the date. And I think "thanks for a challenging interview" is just about the most complimentary thing he could have put, given the nature of what we were doing. And because animal liberation has had such an impact on my overall ethical philosophy, the book itself means a lot to me. It's one of those few things that I would kind of try to save if the building was burning down or something like that. But the one thing that I would definitely save if the building was burning down, probably my most prized possession of the entire bookshelf, is this thing here. This is a 10,000 subscriber custom wooden plaque that my friends Matty and Gabriel made for me when I hit 10,000 subscribers. A lot of people seem to think that I made this for myself when I hit 10,000 subscribers and that I kind of egotistically made myself an award. That's not what happened. Obviously, one of the biggest milestones that any aspiring YouTuber is aiming for is to get one of these bad boys, the 100,000 subscriber plaque. But when I hit 10,000 subscribers, because, you know, having a subscriber plaque is one of the things that aspiring YouTubers dream of, my friends very kindly made this for me, and it's just so special to me. I treasure this more than I treasure the 100,000 subscriber plaque by a long way. And that plaque is sitting on top here of a book, Life on Earth by David Attenborough, which is similarly signed. On the next shelf down, we start with this. This is quite an interesting book, because this is of course Richard Dawkins' second latest book, Outgrowing God. But I was sent this by Penguin before the book came out, so it was quite a special thing for me. But I actually forgot to get Richard Dawkins to sign it, but it's still quite a special book. Next to that, I've got Armin Navabi's book, and Armin Navabi was the very first guest on the Cosmic Skeptic podcast. Armin, of course, signed the book for me, but not only with his kind of normal English signature, as he said, but also this special Persian signature. A book about kind of grammar and English, which is quite funny, a cookbook. This book by David Nutt. I saw David Nutt speak at a festival that I went to not long ago. David Nutt is an expert in drugs and alcohol, and he used to be an advisor to the UK government, but he then published some research or some finding and essentially said publicly that riding a horse is more dangerous than doing MDMA, and the government promptly fired him. The rest of the shelf is basically fiction. I've got quite a few books by George Orwell stuck together, as well as Dostoevsky books, some of my favourite novels, as well as my favourite poet, who is Philip Larkin, and this lovely collection of poems. So the bottom shelf here is maybe where the really interesting stuff is. In the middle, we've got a 6-volume biography of George Washington. And the reason that I have this, I'm not actually that interested in having a massive 6-volume biography of George Washington, but when I had a look in the shop, here it says 6 volumes for £20. Turns out that was actually a mislabeling. It was supposed to be £20 per volume, but I took it to the counter, and because I looked up the books and they're worth a lot more than that, so I took it to the counter and said, listen, are you sure that that's not supposed to be £20 per book? And he basically said to me, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it's supposed to mean, but because it says 6 volumes for £20, I have to sell you them for £20. So now I have a 6-volume biography of George Washington. That collection of George Washington biographies is stood on top of this lovely leather-bound copy of The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine, next to some more Eastern Press leather-bound copies, first of 1984, and also this copy of the Federalist Papers, which was actually a birthday present from one of my patrons. James, if you're watching, love the book. It's got this lovely drawing of Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison in the front, and it's just kind of beautifully, the typography is beautiful, everything about it's lovely. The only downside, of course, is that these books are leather bound, which means that now that I'm a vegan, I can't buy them anymore. So I won't be buying any more of these for my collection, but I certainly won't be selling them either. And then finally, on the right-hand side here, we have this amazing find that I got in a second-hand bookshop in the United States again. This is a first edition of The Catcher in the Rye. So it's a hardback, and if you look on the inside, you can see that it's dated to 1951, because this book, this actual physical copy of the book, was published in 1951 when the book first came out. And finally, the last book that I have on the shelf here is this History of the United States. So the thing that makes it interesting is that this book is just so old. This book was written, or this book was published, this physical book was published within living memory of the American Civil War. So it's a history of the United States that talks about the Civil War as if it just happened, which I find just fascinating. And it only cost me $7. And it looks like this particular edition was published in 1871. But okay, we'll move on to the next shelf, but we'll go via this lovely painting, which I haven't found a place to put up yet, by Michael Williams, who is a guy that paints stuff on Instagram, tagged me in this painting, and I was just like, that's incredible, that's an amazing painting, so I bought it off him. So Michael, if you're watching, thanks again for the painting. I need to find a way to put it up. And then I've actually just got a few books here. These are some books that I've just taken off the shelves because of my current university studies. This book here, The Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology, the absolute go-to guide for arguments for the existence of God. I absolutely love this book. It's been an incredible resource in the philosophy of religion. If you're trying to teach yourself philosophy of religion, or if you're a student of the subject, you need to have access to this book. It's of course edited by William Lane Craig, another guest on the podcast, but it contains essays by a whole host of various philosophical experts, including Craig, but also people like J.P. Morland, Lydia McGrew, Alexander Pruss has a fantastic essay in here on the cosmological argument. So yeah, definitely pick it up if you can. And then on top of that, I've just got some random books here, an introductory book to metaethics. I've also got a few books on Islam because, as some of you may know, I'm currently studying a paper, Islam in the Classical Period, for my final exams at uni. This one in particular comes recommended recommended by the faculty. And then finally, just Stephen Jay Gould's trash book, Rocks of Ages, which I'm being forced to read for my science and religion paper. Okay, so moving on to this shelf, we start at the top with essentially a shelf of philosophy, starting with perhaps the most important philosophical books in all of history, the Quran and the Bible, followed by some works of political philosophy. So we've got The Social Contract, we've got Machiavelli's The Prince, we've got Thomas Paine's Rights of Man and Common Sense, and John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, followed by some Albert Camus, and then some Bertrand Russell, probably the most important analytic philosopher of the 20th century. I've got his autobiography here, and The History of Western Philosophy. And if you read the autobiography, you will learn that a great deal, apparently, of the history of Western philosophy was written whilst Bertrand Russell was naked. So enjoy that image. Next up, we have some little small books. You can come and have a look. We've got David Hume's little treatise on suicide. We've got John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, and Seneca on the Shortness of Life, followed by some more David Hume, a treatise of human nature and an inquiry concerning human understanding. The inquiry is essentially a revision of the treatise, and there's mixed opinion on exactly why David Hume did that. Hume himself said that it was just an updated version, but many people think that he rewrote it to make it more palatable and sell more copies. So in at least the Oxford syllabus, they still make us read the original treatise on human nature. It's a good place to start with David Hume. Next up is this controversial little volume, which is Essays and Aphorisms by Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer is the most elegant pessimist to have ever put a pen to paper. If you want to understand the pessimist philosophy, the idea that suffering is the thing that makes itself present in life and essentially is the defining quality of the human experience, it's expressed nowhere better than by Arthur Schopenhauer. But this collection also contains an essay that Arthur Schopenhauer wrote on women, which is, shall we say, infamous. You know, I was about to read an extract, but it's so misogynistic that it might actually demonetize this video. I actually have another collection of essays by Arthur Schopenhauer, including the essay on women, and in the editor's preface, he actually says, by the way, the essay on women isn't a joke. He wasn't being ironic, he was actually being serious. It's so bad that to the modern reader, it can almost seem like he's doing some kind of parody or trying to make a joke or something. He's not, he was just a massive misogynist. I mean, it's possible that part of the reason why Arthur Schopenhauer was such a pessimist and was so attuned to the suffering of the human experience was because he was a massive misogynist who just couldn't get laid. Next to Arthur Schopenhauer here, I have a bunch of stuff on Descartes. So we have, of course, the set text Meditations on First Philosophy, which is kind of, again, one of the go-to Descartes texts. It's where you find the cogito, or at least one version of it. You don't actually find I think, therefore I am in that phrase, the cogito ergo sum, in this book, but it's one of the places where it's most famously expressed. You'll also find two proofs for the existence of God, an argument for the separation of mind and body, an argument for the existence of the external world. It's kind of, as I say, go-to Descartes. But it can be quite difficult to just jump into reading Descartes, especially people who are writing so long ago. Some of the language they're using is different. You need to understand the context they were writing in. And so it's always a good idea to refer to secondary literature. And when it comes to Descartes, one of the best places you can go is to John Cottingham. This particular book here is one that's constantly recommended by tutors to students who are studying Descartes. So if you want to understand Descartes, this book by John Cottingham is a great place to start. Following that, I have John Stuart Mill's Utilitarianism, or as Muhammad Hijab would say, Utilitarianism.
Utilitarianism.
With that famous fourth chapter, which is not called The Proof of Utilitarianism.
Everyone in the audience can Google it. Yes, it's actually, the title is Proof of Utilitarianism, chapter 4.
Do you know what I said?
Is he right? It's not proof of... Okay, well, I can see that point.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, click this link. And actually, you know what? Don't click that link. It's not worth the headache. But of course, another classic work of liberal philosophy and another thing I have to study for my ethics exam. Then I've got a book by Michael Sandel, another podcast guest. This one is Justice. If you just want a general introduction to normative ethics, just a discussion of consequentialism, of Kantianism, and kind of a good place to start with all of that kind of stuff, Justice by Michael Sandel is probably the best recommendation I could give you. Then I've got this rather special book, Conversations on Ethics, which just contains a bunch of essays and arguments and conversations on ethics. But the reason this is special to me is that one of my old teachers gave it to me. They just had the book, they weren't reading it. She thought that I might like it, and it's just a nice memento of that time when I was studying my A-levels and doing philosophy. Finally, on the top shelf, we've got this book by A.C. Grayling, another more recent history of philosophy. And again, this is signed when I saw A.C. Grayling talk in Oxford. Okay, so on the next shelf down, you'll probably have already spotted him. It's Hitch. Yeah, I do have a bust of Christopher Hitchens. It's partly ironic, just because I know that Christopher Hitchens would hate the fact that anyone would be such a sycophant of him to get a bust of him, but I saw it on like Etsy or something, and I thought if there's anyone who's gonna have a bust of Christopher Hitchens, it's gonna be me. Although when I first got it, my brother pointed out that it looks quite a lot like David Icke. So now I can't unsee that, so thanks, bro. And next to that bust of Hitchens, we have Hitch 22. And again, this is a signed edition, made out to someone called Bernie. I just wonder who that Bernie is. If you're out there, Bernie, let me know. And then on the other side of Hitch, I've got Hans Kung's book, Islam, Past, Present and Future. Hans Kung is a Christian theologian, but he wrote this absolutely massive, fat book about Islam. It's a great kind of accessible read to people who are more familiar with Christian theology. He makes a lot of cross comparisons. Okay, let's try and get through the rest of this fairly quickly. We have the Oxford Handbook of Animal Ethics, which of course someone like me should probably own. The Case for Animal Rights by Tom Regan. Animals, a History, which is about the history of the position of animals within philosophy, stemming back all the way back to like Aristotle, I think is where the book starts. Gary Francione's book, Animal Rights, The Abolitionist Approach. Next to that is yet another copy of Animal Liberation, and then Jonathan Safran Foer's book, Eating Animals, Should We Stop? Now, I've always recommended Peter Singer's book as the first port of call for animal ethics, but this is even more accessible. Jonathan Safran Foer's book is a fantastic book. If you're vegan or not, if you haven't read it, it's definitely worth picking it up. Next up is just a bunch of Hitchens, The Missionary Position, Letters to a Young Contrarian, his biography of Thomas Jefferson, his biography of Thomas Paine, God is Not Great, Hitch 22, and Mortality, which is my favorite book, probably my favorite book that Hitchens wrote, actually. I love Letters to a Young Contrarian, but this was the first book of Christopher Hitchens that I ever read. It's the last one he wrote, but the first one I read. It's essentially, as he was dying of cancer, he was writing these essays for Vanity Fair with the intention of them being collated into a book, which eventually happened, but the size of the book will give you an indication of what happened at the end. He hadn't finished writing the book, but what he had done is made notes of the things he was going to include in future essays because he thought he had more time. And the editors of the book decided to include the scrambled jottings of this dying man as the final chapter of the book, and it is just heartbreaking to read, especially if you're a fan of Christopher Hitchens like I am. The final chapter here, just a bunch of scrambled notes. This one here, for instance, just says, misery of seeing oneself on old videos or YouTubes. And it kind of gives me the thought of Christopher Hitchens kind of laying in his bed, unable to properly move and speak, being too fragile and weak, but watching himself on YouTube. It's a tragic thought to think about. But the fact that he was still writing and still wanted his voice to be heard until the last opportunity, I think is a testament to the guy that Christopher Hitchens was. Okay, so just a quick fire. We've got Darkness Visible by William Styron, the kind of first go-to book on depression. The Looming Tower by Lawrence Wright, which is an overview of the events leading up to and including the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Defending My Enemy. This is by an ex-president of the American Civil Liberties Union. He wrote this about the Skokie case, where a bunch of Nazis were trying to march in a predominantly Jewish town called Skokie, and the town said, no, you're not allowed to march. And the American Civil Liberties Union came out and defended their right to march, despite this guy being a Jew himself. And it's a great work on freedom of expression for those that you dislike or detest. Man's Search for Meaning, followed by Martin Luther King, Why We Can't Wait, and then this book, Plain Honest Men by Richard Beeman, one of the absolute greatest works of literature on American history. This book is boring. It's very, very boring. It goes kind of step by step through the Constitutional Convention, talking about how the Constitution was formed, all the different characters involved, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very dry read, but having read through it, it gave me so much information about the founding of the United States, A People's History of the United States, followed by the Constitution of the States, and then a few books by C.S. Lewis. Last up, we've got this book here, Why I'm Not a Muslim, and this book by Edward Fazer, which is 5 Proofs for the Existence of God. You might have heard me recommend this before in certain debates that I've been doing. This tells you about Aristotle and Aquinas and Leibniz and some philosophers whose approaches to the question you might not have come across before. I found this book incredibly useful, incredibly instructive, and again, I'd recommend reading this if you're interested in the philosophy of religion. Now on the bottom shelf here, I've got this really helpful book about the Hadith literature from Jonathan Brown. If you want to learn about the Hadith and the Sunnah of the Prophet, that's a great book to start with, as well as a biography of the Prophet by Karen Armstrong, followed by this massive history of Christianity, and then apparently 2 copies of Freakonomics, I'm not quite sure how that happened, and a bunch of these kind of penguin orange back books that I've just put together because they look nice. And of course, as is usually the case when you find books by people like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris on my shelf, you can pick up any one of them, and the likelihood is that it's signed. And then we've just got Sapiens and Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. That's it. Those are all the books that you're seeing in the background of my videos and some of the books that I think it's most important to have on my shelf. Now, I do own more books than the books that I've shown you today, but these are the books that are in the background of my videos, the ones that you keep asking about. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that little tour. It's worth noting though that I haven't read all of these books. I've read a lot of them, but I haven't read all of them. I actually think that having a library full of books that you haven't read is more valuable than having a library of books that you have read. But a lot of the reading that I'm doing at the moment is actually just online. In fact, my entire life at the moment, my job, my university career, and at the moment, of course, a lot of my social life exists online. And that's why I want to make sure that when I am online, I'm browsing safely. That's right, I want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor of this video, ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is a virtual private network that protects your internet security when browsing online. As I say, I'm someone whose entire job and currently my entire university life lives online, and so I spent a lot of time in the past worrying about my online security. I want to make it as hard as I can for my data to be compromised by people that I don't want to have it. And that's why I've been using ExpressVPN. Even if you're just a casual internet user, you'll still have passwords, emails, bank details, and a host of other things that you want to protect from hackers, especially when you're connected to unencrypted Wi-Fi networks. But it's not just hackers you have to look out for. You guys might have seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, which recently exposed many of the ways in which big tech companies mine your data and track your online activity in order to use or sell it for profit. ExpressVPN masks my IP address by rerouting my network data through a separate secure server, making it much more difficult for websites and big tech companies to personally identify me. Even when you use incognito mode, you might think that nobody can see what you're doing online, but your internet service provider can still see all the sites you visit. And in the UK, internet service providers are required by law to keep logs of my activities online for up to a year. With ExpressVPN, your online activity stays your own business. But since, as I say, my entire life is basically online at the moment, I want to make sure that I can still browse the internet quickly and efficiently. Many VPNs will slow down your internet, but ExpressVPN has always been incredibly fast and convenient. Let me show you. So to connect to ExpressVPN, all I have to do is I can either use this little tab at the top here, which allows me to connect directly, or I can just open the software, click on this button, and within seconds, I'll be connected, in this case, to a server in the United States. And you'll see that my internet is just as quick as it ever has been. And the best part is that if you use the link in the description, expressvpn.com/Cosmic Skeptic, you can get 3 months of ExpressVPN completely for free. It's a no-brainer. Just click the link in the description to try it out. I'm sure you'll like it just as much as I do. But anyway, thank you all for watching this video. Sorry I haven't been uploading in a while. I finished my exams on June 17th, and after that, I'm gonna be a full-time YouTuber for the first time ever. So thanks for just checking in, checking out the book collection. I hope you enjoyed it, found it interesting, and I'll see you in the next one.